Aloha, I'm Kanoa Leahey, and welcome to another edition of Ka Pewa, where we speak with community members and leaders about some of the issues facing the state of Hawaii. And today, we are going to focus on a whole host of different issues with U.S. Senator Brian Schatz. All right, aloha, Senator Schatz. Thanks for joining us here on this episode of Ka Pewa.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Usually when we get together, we're talking sports, but this is a different forum altogether here.
Yeah, I'm maybe more qualified to talk in this area.
You have been now representing Hawaii in Washington, D.C. since 2012. I'd imagine there have been a lot of changes, quite an evolution over the course of just how legislative politics work and the climate over there. What have you seen as far as how things have changed from a political leadership standpoint?
Well, I think, the internet is polarizing us. There's no doubt about it. And so the incentives for individual politicians, I think, run towards saying things that are more extreme, more polarizing, more angry. My favorite example of this was back before Instagram was a thing. I posted something on Facebook, not about how Donald Trump was, terrible, but about how I was on a bipartisan basis getting more money for an energy program. And it was my lowest performing post that I had ever had on Facebook. And that was an indicator of the kind of difference between real life, where my job is to actually get things done, and the internet, where the angrier I am, the more shrill I am, the more freaked out I am, the more engagement I get. And I think that's kind of not just the incentive structure for politicians, but kind of the way we're all starting to work. And so my job is, obviously in the Trump era, we have to fight some things that are contrary to our values and our interests, but we also have to continue to try to seek common ground. And so that's the challenge, I think, during Trump 2.0 in particular, with these algorithms kind of splitting us all apart, that in Hawaii in particular, we have to see that that's happening and prevent that kind of mainland style politics from infecting us.
Because it seems as though there is this underlying call on the part of the Democrats to, who have been perhaps seen over the course of time as being passive in some of these disputes. There seems to be a call of like fighting fire with fire. Is that an over-dramatization and characterization of that?
No, and I think we have to do that, but I also think you have to continue to try to find common ground. I read Ted Kennedy's book, and I still remember, I'm going to paraphrase, but he used to say that he would roar on the floor, and then he would go and pour a whiskey with his Republican adversary and cut a deal. And I remember very early in my term, of all people, Bernie Sanders and John McCain were absolutely screaming at each other about something on the floor. And then they ended up passing a bipartisan bill to help veterans. And so my ability to kind of yell at Ted Cruz and have him yell at me back, and then for us to do a bill for kids' online safety to remove kids from social media if they're under 13 years old, that's part of the job, is that you have to fight where it is necessary, but find common ground where it's possible. It's definitely harder than it's ever been, but I love the challenge.
As far as policy approaches are concerned, there is a book, Abundance, written by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, suggesting that the progressive public policy in the United States is now fractured or broken, calling instead for what is referred to as abundance liberalism. How do you view this change in policy approach suggested in this book?
So full disclosure, I love this book. And it's because I've seen in the state of Hawaii, I came up through the environmental movement in the state of Hawaii. I came up through the Save Sandy Beach Coalition and the Save Sunset Beach Coalition. They have the bumper stickers, Save Sandy Beach, Save Sunset Beach. And then the third bumper sticker, which I remember, and I slapped it on my Accord hatchback, Save Something. Right? And the environmental movement in Hawaii was always about stopping bad stuff. And that's still very appropriate. But those laws and rules and political norms that were established to protect all of these sacred places, environmentally sacred or culturally significant, also stop us from building the things that we say we all want. And it is very, very difficult to build housing and clean energy in the state of Hawaii. So as a progressive, I want a just, sustainable society where local people, a nurse, a firefighter, the elderly, the disabled, the student, they all have a place to live. And I also think we need to get to 100% clean energy. It is a fantasy to think that we're going to be able to get to 100% clean energy or to have enough housing for everybody without building a bunch of housing. Mm-hmm. And so abundance is just kind of operating under this premise that in some instances, the reason we don't have enough of what we need is corporations. In some instances, the problem is the government rules itself. And what we should do is have no particular preconception about whether the problem is a monopoly or too many rules or whatever it is. The idea is, how do we unlock the idea that everybody deserves their basic economic dignity? And with housing, like, we've just made it really, really hard to build the thing that we all say we want. We're 70,000 units short in the state of Hawaii. We can't even get apartment buildings built on the corner of Eisenberg and King. The things that we all say we want, it still takes 10 years, 12 years, 15 years to build. And as it relates to clean energy, we're in the same position. So I don't think there's anything progressive about stopping us from building the world that we need. And these guys kind of crystallized, I think, for the national scene, this idea that with AI, with all of these technological developments, that we can have nice things, but we're going to have to not operate as though we're in the 60s and the 70s.
How much more difficult is that now with the current climate and with the current administration in D.C.? I
mean, on the one hand, everything's more difficult, but on the other hand, this issue remains bipartisan. One little bright spot, Tim Scott, the Republican senator from South Carolina, he's the chairman of the Housing and Banking Committee, and the top Democrat is Elizabeth Warren. They actually did a bipartisan bill out of the Banking Committee, a Housing and Banking Committee, and I think it was unanimous out of that committee, that does a bunch of very important things, gets rid of stupid rules, provides subsidies where appropriate, and also kind of unlocks private sector dollars for more housing. If you can get a super conservative South Carolina senator and Elizabeth Warren to agree, then you're kind of doing politics right. Mm-hmm. Because everybody understands that, the housing shortage used to be places like Hawaii, places like San Francisco, LA, maybe Chicago, maybe DC, maybe New York, but now the housing shortage is absolutely everywhere. Rural, urban, suburban, tribal lands. And as a result, there's a bipartisan desire to fix this thing.
Just last month, you spoke on the Senate floor on the housing crisis, the need to build more houses, as you have already alluded to. And you described it as a problem that the government has created. You touched on it a little bit, but if you could elaborate more on exactly what you mean by that and any kind of potential solution to help mitigate this crisis.
Well, the problem is that in politics, what people want to hear is like, here's the one thing that we can do. And the truth is that if you ask anybody who wants to build apartments or homes for local people, it's not one thing, it's like 150 mm-hmm. things. So like interior stairwells. In Makiki, where I lived for a long time and represented for a long time, there was a requirement for interior courtyard space, which is the kind of thing that sounds really nice, right? Because, you have everyone's entitled to some green space. But if you own land and the middle of that land can't be used for the housing, it's very hard to make anything pencil. Some people want to actually just renovate their property, but there's a new setback requirement, so you have to go move back from the sidewalk. Another example is the State Historic Preservation Division is supposed to administer the National Historic Preservation Law. Okay, fine. And the law says if something is 50 years old or older and it has historical significance, then a bunch of new requirements can be applied, and you can also have new protections for that particular property. Our State Historic Preservation Division assumes that anything over 50 years old is automatically historic. You don't have to make a determination. It's just automatically historic. And then you have to prove that it's not. Now, everybody's got a house. If you are lucky enough to have a house, you're probably a person who has a house that's more than 50 years old. My house is more than 100 years old, and not the cool Manoa fancy kind 100 years old. It's just old. And so those little laws are these little pain points that delay a project by 2 to 4 weeks here and there. And then the most absurd and, in my view, corrupt part of this process is if you don't know how to navigate this and you're just a person trying to build a place for your in-laws or a place for your kids on your own property, it might take 18 months, it might take 36 months, right? If you're a huge developer, you just buy the consultants, spread that cost among all the units you're about to build, and then they get sort of fast-tracked. So Or you can pay a permit expediter, literally give someone cash, and then your thing ends up on the top of the pile. That is a nutty way to do business in the state of Hawaii. Nobody likes it, and we've got to get rid of it. Just one thought that is making me kind of excited. Luke Evslin, House member from Kauai, Chris Todd from Hilo area, and also the new finance chairman of the State House, they're both young parents, and they're both progressives, but they are both very strongly in favor of making it easier to build housing. And I think there's a generational shift in the Democratic Party across the country, but also in the progressive movement in Hawaii to realize, like, hey, there is literally nothing progressive about making your cousin move to Reno because they just can't make it anymore.
That is exciting. I mean, you're talking about specific legislation potentially that can at least start to perhaps break into this crisis, right?
Yeah, and they actually passed some pretty important reforms at the legislature 2 years ago, and then an additional round of reforms this last legislative session. And what was cool was there was kind of an assumption, oh my God, the environmentalists are going to get super angry about all these changes. And we worked very closely with environmental organizations to say, essentially, you want to keep the country, so do I. The way to keep the country in a way that is consistent with our values, which is to say protect special places, but also provide housing, is to densify the urban core. And I don't think they were super thrilled with all the bills, but they did not go full force against these pieces of legislation because they recognize that if we're going to have a just, sustainable place and we're going to protect our biological diversity, we're going to adapt to climate change, we're going to respect the host culture, that means somebody's got to live somewhere. And it probably means more density, and not just in urban Honolulu, but actually the urban areas on our neighbor islands as well.
There have been some new housing laws here in Hawaii, some of it prompted out of the response to the Lahaina wildfires. How does that change the navigation in addressing this issue?
Well, I think the Lahaina thing is first of all, it's its own thing because it was such a terrible tragedy. And there's always two ways to look at this. A lot of people, most people, are still struggling in one way or another. But if you told me a year ago that we would have around 1,000 temporary units built, around 400 permits pulled and authorized by the county, and another 300 in process, and that we're anywhere from, I would say, a quarter to a half on the way to being rebuilt, that would have exceeded my expectations. I was worried that we were just going to get stuck and we were going to argue with each other. And credit to the Maui community, and I mean everybody, left, right, and center, government, nonprofit, Lahaina leaders, they kind of all came together and said, look, the shoreline management area is a little more complicated, a little more challenging. Moku'ula is certainly a special place that we don't just want to not build on, but we actually want to kind of enhance the resources there so we can respect again how central that was to Hawaii's history, not just Maui or Lahaina's history. So all of that got handled, but they also said, look, building, in the Mauka part of Lahaina town, building even Mauka of the highway, the freeway, that makes sense to us. And so I wouldn't say there's total consensus, but that community process reminds me of what the former chief of staff of Governor Ige used to say. You got to go slow to go fast. So sometimes when you rush, it backfires and you lose several years. And I was very worried that we were going to go slow and then go slower and slower. But we're now starting to pick up some momentum. And I think Lahaina, again, there's no victory laps. We are nowhere near where we need to be. But I was out there and we were, driving up and down Lahaina Luna Road, all the rest of it. And it was not like just a couple of developments. There were it started to look like a subdivision. People were swinging hammers. There were all kinds of heavy equipment being operated, individual owner builders, and then bigger contractors. Like, it's happening. And then anyone who flies to and from Maui understands that the labor force is now doing that thing where they take the first flight out and the last flight back. And so there's some momentum on the island of Maui now.
There seems to be another layer of resistance to the intent behind some of what you're talking about, and that is the concept of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, which I would believe runs pretty rampant, especially here in the state of Hawaii. And so everybody can get on board with the general idea of affordable housing, more homes for more people, but there is that concept of, as long as it's not close to where I'm at. How do you fight against that?
So I think there's two things. One is that we have to change the politics here. And we have to challenge people who think of themselves as kind, who think of themselves as embracing local values, and certainly wouldn't want to be characterized as someone who wants to force people to leave the state because they just can't afford it. But to challenge them and say, how much is the quote unquote character of your neighborhood the most important thing, right? How harmed are you if someone has a duplex like 3 doors down? Is that a catastrophe for you? Like, maybe it's not your preference, but if the alternative is people living on the streets or leaving the state of Hawaii, then I think people just kind of need to have a moment of reflection and decide what really matters about Hawaii. And what really matters about Hawaii is the people, right? And so that's one part of this. The other part of it is like purely tactics, which is the higher up you go, to your point, Kanoa, in the government, the more people are generally like in favor of housing. And the more narrow you go, the more people go like, well, yeah, but not here because this one's inappropriate. It's going to cause traffic. It's going to cause all that nonsense. And so the more you can make these state laws rather than county laws, the better positioned you are, because individual county council members are in a tough position if they're approving a subdivision that's unpopular in their little neighborhood. But everybody's just generally in favor of housing. And so we have to kind of work the system a little bit. But I think the main thing we have to do is change the politics. And I think it's really important for people who care about climate and care about justice to embrace the idea that housing is not a bad thing. There are housing projects that are inappropriate and they should be rejected. But when someone comes to you and says, we want a subdivision and we want firefighters and nurses and students and everybody else to be able to live on this island, and we don't want, especially like on Maui, the hotel workers, there's no apartment buildings, right? People are just doubling and tripling up, in these like 5-bedroom houses, and you got 2 or 3 people in each bedroom, some on the couches and all the rest of it. It's not a humane way to live. I was on Kauai, I guess it was earlier this week, and they have some workforce housing, but it is, it's barely livable in my opinion. So we really have to kind of do a little gut check morally about what it means to be in Hawaii. And it's not just beautiful views and ecosystems and those kinds of things. It's also the people. And if the people have to move, then I think that's a tragedy and that's our fault.
I think that's very well said. You are back in Hawaii during this August recess. You've been all over the state, as you mentioned, Kauai earlier this week, over on Hawaii Island as well. You've been doing a lot of interviews, podcasts like this one, town hall meetings. Tell us where you've been and what you are primarily hearing from your constituents.
So a full day on Kauai, full day on Maui, a very full day on the Big Island, Hilo side, Kona side, Waimea side. Didn't hit Puna and Ka'u, but I've been almost everywhere. And I think the thing that is on a lot of people, there's a lot of questions about the national scene, and I try to kind of redirect folks, not because I don't think that's important, but because there's only so much a local Hawaii resident is going to be in a position to do, until the midterms about the national scene. People are really, really worried about the cuts coming from the big tax bill and the Medicaid and SNAP cuts in particular. So there's 2 ways to look at this. One, on the Medicaid side, this could reduce enough revenue for our community hospitals and clinics that some of them may be forced to either shut down or consolidate. And so we're in regular conversation about how to plug any revenue holes so that they don't collapse, right? And, looking at a map, this Kanoa, it's not so easy to say, well, Maui has a hospital. It's like, if you're in Lahaina and the thing is in central Maui, it's a hospital, but it may not be in time for you. And, God forbid there's a king tide or some other thing that prevents you from driving in, you're stuck. So the institutional piece is one part. The other thing is that the way the Medicaid cuts are sort of set up is it's all making it super hard to remain eligible. So there's all these onerous requirements about showing that you're either working or trying to find work. And, these things have always been in different laws. But these ones are really designed to kick people off the rolls. Like they're not just it'd be nice if you're working. This is, you miss a deadline, you're off. Because they book the savings of removing people from Medicaid in order to pay for their tax cuts. And so this is one, I think, issue where Hawaii's better positioned to navigate it because we know each other. Because at the institutional level, we know each other. Because the media is willing to get the word out. Because churches and unions and other organizations are willing to make sure that everybody remains eligible. So like Waianae Comp Health Center, they have eyes on each one of their 6,000 Medicaid eligible clients, and they know how to find them and help them to remain eligible. But not every community has like that level of specificity about who's eligible and how to find them. And that's what we got to build out over the next year. Nonprofit money, government folks, community organizations, churches, whomever, Micronesians United. It's kind of like we got to put the band back together and really get the word out to make sure people understand you miss a deadline and you're going to be ineligible and there will be very little we can do. And that'll hurt them, but it'll also hurt the hospitals because then you're into unreimbursed care at the ER and everybody knows what a disaster that is, both on the healthcare side and also for the fiscal picture for those institutions.
It seems like a lot of the fear and uncertainty can also be related to this culture of misinformation in which we live, where there are different narratives, there are all kinds of different characterizations that people are inundated with through social media and other media outlets and platforms. How do you try to fight against that in trying to get real messaging and accurate information out to your constituents?
I mean, I don't have a good answer for solving the bigger misinformation problem. Obviously, we have our channels. We have an email that it's like we send it to 75,000 or something people. And over the course of every couple of months, like tens of thousands of people open those emails. I think because it's not social media and because sometimes I can be pretty partisan, but those emails are very straightforward, right down the middle, just informational. And I think the more I can be a resource for people who are rooting for me and people who are rooting against me, just to know that I got I'm not going to lie to them. You call my office, I don't care who you voted for or if you voted, we're still going to be helpful. And so my job, I think, is to be a sort of clearinghouse for good information. And I may have my opinion about Donald Trump or Republicans or this or that issue, but my fundamental job is to serve everybody in the state of Hawaii. And I think the sort of coin of the realm in politics is trust, and I try not to abuse that.
You have, as mentioned, been serving in Washington on behalf of the state of Hawaii since 2012. You're on a host of different committees. You serve on the Senate Democratic Leadership Team as Chief Deputy Whip and Deputy Conference Secretary. It is being reported that you have accumulated the necessary support to possibly replace Illinois Senator Dick Durbin as the Democratic Whip after he retires. What else can you say about that?
Knock on wood, because it's a long time from now. Look, Dick Durbin is my friend. He's the whip, and he's not running for re-election. And so after the next election, next November, there will be an internal election for the whole leadership lineup. And I like being the deputy whip, and I'm interested in being the whip because I think the whip's job is basically to kind of, I don't know what you would call it. It's like a general manager of a team, maybe player coach. There are a lot of super talented, super impressive people in the United States Senate. These are, astronauts and CEOs and governors and mayors and prosecutors, and they really are legit impressive human beings. They don't always function well together, right? Because it's like getting an all-star team together and then asking them to share the ball. They don't like to share the ball. And so I think where my talents lie in terms of politics is trying to maximize other people's opportunities and talents, because I see the 47 of us and the kind of star power and the firepower and all the rest of it and the goodwill, and yet we don't always work as well as a team as we should. So I like that part. I like to think to myself, I won't name names, so-and-so gets tired after 9 p.m., so-and-so gives great speeches but can sometimes go too long, so-and-so is very needy and I need to kind of manage them and blah, blah, blah. But I usually don't write down those things, but I'm always looking around trying to make sure that the team is happy and that the team is maximally successful. So if I get to do that as whip, I'll be thrilled, because I just think when you get into a room like that, you have to think to yourself, well, what can I add, right? Like if I'm just the 7th best speech giver, right, or whatever, or like among the many people who are relatively bright, like that's cool. But I'm more interested in where can I add value, and I think it's the teamwork piece and the organizing the organizers that I love about the job.
You are representing a place that so often over the course of history has been overlooked because of its geography, because it's so far away, and yet this may be a little bit more of an existential question. It seems as though you have a certain optimism and hope. What gives you that optimism and hope?
I mean, for one thing, as hard as this all seems, this is not the hardest time that the United States has ever faced. It certainly cracks the top 10 now, maybe even the top 5. But we have come through difficulty as a country. And it's hard to imagine that we're the ones that have to come through this difficulty, because when you look back on the Civil Rights era, the Vietnam War, the Civil War, World War II, you think of those people as kind of like icons or heroes or demigods or whatever, and now it's just us, right? And you realize those people were just people too, trying to fight like hell for their country, for their republic. And so all I can do is everything I can do. All I can do is fight like hell. And I also just think hope is not a feeling. Hope is a decision. It's a commitment to the future. Hope is not this naive belief that like everything's cool, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Everything is not cool. Everything is not automatically going to be fine. But we're talented enough, we have a strong enough constitution, and the people are responding in such a way that I'm still hopeful over the long run. I think we are in for a rough year and a half. And I think the country is going to, it's going to experience some real difficulty. But that is different from saying this is the end of the republic. This is not the end of the republic. This is just a difficult time, and we will all get through it together.
It is a Ka Pewa by Hawaii Community Foundation tradition. At the end of these interviews, I like to give our guest the floor. If there is anything else that you feel like you want to add, anything that we haven't touched on that you feel might be important.
First of all, thank you for doing this, and thanks to Hawaii Community Foundation for doing this. What I would say is, if there's anybody out there listening that thinks to themselves, I'm not really sure who I'm supposed to call about this issue, contact our office. Schatz.senate.gov, there is a little box there, and it is not a black hole. It goes to someone in my office who receives it as an email, and we try to solve problems. Because I know that people watching politics through their phones or watching it on TV and getting frustrated, it kind of feels so big and sometimes so daunting or so infuriating that you forget that like at least half of my job is just helping people to navigate their individual situations. And as much as that's not going to make the headlines, that's really a substantial part of what a Senate office is going to do. And so please contact us and let us know however we can be helpful.
Yeah, that doubles as a call to action as well, right? For people who want to get involved with some of the efforts that you've been speaking about.
Absolutely. Contact our office. A real person will read your stuff.
Senator Brian Schatz, thank you for joining Ka Pewa.
Thank you.